Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into the dusky streets of Victorian London, a city that never quite settled down, even when the gas lamps dimmed and the fog rolled thick through the alleyways. You're wrapped in a wool shawl, the kind that smells faintly of coal smoke and lavender sachets. The hour's late, but the city buzzes like a ticking clock wound too tight. Somewhere, a hansom cab clatters past on cobblestones. In 1,000 little rooms, people twist and turn under heavy blankets, chasing a kind of peace that seems just out of reach. This is a story about sleep, or more precisely, the maddening lack of it. You probably wouldn't survive one night in a Victorian bed, if we're being honest. Between the feather mattresses stuffed to odd proportions, the persistent damp, and the neighbors snoring on the other side of the paper-thin wall, it's a miracle anyone managed a full night's rest. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The 19th century is barreling toward progress like a steam engine with no brakes, and poor London is jittery with it. There's industry in every breath, soot in your lungs, gears in your ears. The city hums and hisses like it's alive, and it refuses to sleep just because the sun's taken a break. And honestly, neither do you. You're one of many, thousands in fact, feeling the weight of this new mechanical life pressing down on your eyelids, but never quite enough to close them. The concept of insomnia is still in its infancy, a term whispered by doctors and murmured by overtaxed clerks. It doesn't have the tidy definition it holds today. In fact, some Victorians suspect it's a moral failing, a sign you've overindulged. Or worse, that your conscience is uneasy. You stroll past a newspaper boy shouting about some scandal in Parliament. It's nearing midnight. In the fashionable parts of town, parlors are still lit, faint shadows dancing against lace curtains. A few silhouettes hold teacups, or more likely something stronger. Perhaps a spoonful of laudanum swirled into sherry, that classic Victorian nightcap. Not far from there, a tailor lights a candle to finish hemming a waistcoat. He hasn't slept properly in 3 days. His hand trembles, but the rent is due. Behind him, on the mantel, is a bottle of Dr. Oglethorpe's restorative elixir, a mix of camphor, morphine, and wishful thinking. The working classes aren't the only ones tossing and turning. In drawing rooms and country estates, insomnia is a fashionable complaint. It shows you're refined, sensitive, perhaps even poetic. After all, you can't be expected to sleep through this modern world, can you? Historians still argue whether the sleeplessness of this era was really more common, or if people just talked about it more. With the boom of printed material, especially women's magazines and medical pamphlets, it became chic to discuss your nightly trials. You'd pen letters to the editor detailing the cruel betrayal of your body at 3 a.m., wrapped in velvet and despair. You take a turn down a quieter lane, where gaslights flicker and rhythmic stutters. There's a gentle hiss in the air, the kind that might lull you to sleep if it weren't accompanied by the sound of distant arguing and someone practicing violin badly. Your boots splash in a puddle left from last night's rain. Victorians, you'll soon learn, were obsessed with the mechanics of daily life, and sleep was no exception. They charted, measured, theorized. A good night's rest became both a virtue and an aspiration, like a well-tended garden or an obedient child. There were no sleep apps, of course, but you'd find entire books on the correct number of hours for an adult of good breeding. Too little rest made you nervous. Too much made you slothful. And neither extreme could apparently lead to hysteria, gout, or an unseemly desire for novels. Quirky tidbit: one well-known medical theorist of the time believed that people who slept on their right side were more prone to melancholy. His solution? Sleep upright in a wooden bedchair lined with sheep's wool. Comfortable? Not remotely. Popular? Briefly. As you step past the looming facade of a hospital, you feel the weight of this paradox. In an era that idolized rest, almost no one actually achieved it. Sleep was promised, marketed, measured, but rarely delivered. A clock strikes 1. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere else, a gentleman curses softly at his ceiling. And you, wandering through this restless century, begin to understand Victorian insomnia wasn't just a medical issue. It was an identity, a badge of modernity, a symptom of civilization, as much a fashion as a frustration. And the night, like the city, stretches endlessly ahead of you, dark, foggy, and full of softly ticking clocks. You slip quietly into a warmly lit Victorian parlor, the kind where every object seems to have a backstory and a price tag. The wallpaper is heavy with floral ambition, the curtains thick enough to muffle sins, and somewhere in the corner, a fireplace murmurs softly, more for ambience than warmth. You can almost hear the flick of a match as a lady of the house lights a taper to refresh the glow of a table lamp. It's past midnight, but the house is awake. In this particular social class, the well-to-do, middling sort of rich, insomnia is almost a lifestyle. It's not something to hide, like unpaid debts or cousins with bad manners. It's something to manage, even cure it. You move closer to a low tea table, where a half-finished cup rests next to a bottle marked Mrs. Weatherby's Lavender Sleep Drops. The label promises dreamless repose, free of spiritual turmoil. Handy if you've been tossing over thoughts of empire, etiquette, or your neighbor's suspicious new gardener. The lady of the house is seated in a chaise longue, ankles elegantly tucked, reading a guide on how to silence your mind before bed. The advice? Take small, ladle-like sips of warm milk, count backward from 250 in French, and absolutely do not think about Frenchmen. Sleep, in this circle, is a sort of polite war. You want to surrender, but you must do so gracefully. Preferably while wearing lace-trimmed sleepwear, and with your hair braided just so. You notice something strange. These night routines, far from promoting rest, seem to demand effort. There are rules. Don't eat after 10. Open the windows slightly to let in God's breath, but only if you're above the second floor, lest you be murdered. Do not read thrilling novels after dusk. Dickens is fine. Bronte is borderline. Sensation fiction is out of the question. Historians still argue whether these nightly regimens were about sleep or control of one's body, one's household, one's fears. The Victorian ideal wasn't just a tidy home, it was a tidy mind. So if your thoughts were racing at 2 a.m., the solution wasn't introspection, it was camphor-soaked linens and a prayer. You imagine yourself padding softly across the parlor in slippers with pom-poms, careful not to wake the housemaid. You pour yourself a tiny tot of something medicinal. It tastes like regret, licorice, and faint citrus. Laudanum, most likely. Mixed with brandy. Perfectly normal. Recommended even. Laudanum, for the uninitiated, is essentially opium in liquid form, often sweetened to make it palatable. In Victorian homes, it's as common as aspirin is now. You'd find it in purses, on nightstands, even tucked into children's medicine cabinets. Because nothing says sleep well, darling, like a microdose of narcotics. One cheeky quirk, some hosts even kept a little laudanum in their parlor for late-night guests. It wasn't considered scandalous. If anything, it was a mark of good hospitality. The same way you might offer herbal tea now, or complain about your smart thermostat. A soft chime rings from a grandfather clock. It's 1:30 a.m. The house is dim now, lit only by the golden eye of the fireplace and the occasional candle. Still, sleep does not come easily. You step into the adjoining sitting room, where a gentleman is writing letters with the slow, slanted flourish of someone trying to impress posterity. He too is sleepless. His insomnia, though, is a matter of work. Perhaps he's a barrister, or a banker, or an amateur Egyptologist, which is the 19th century version of someone who gets very into crystals and refuses to stop talking about them. He sighs, dabs his pen in ink, and considers taking one of those lavender drops his wife keeps pushing. But no. He's tried them. They make his dreams too vivid. Last week he woke in a cold sweat, convinced he'd married a French opera singer and lost his fortune in Malta. Instead, he pours himself a small whiskey, pulls a velvet throw over his knees, and tries once more to distract his nerves with a few pages of the Times. The paper is full of trouble, naturally. But to him, the ritual is the point. the weight of it in his hands, the rustle of paper, the illusion of control. Outside, a dog barks once, sharply. Then silence. It's in these quiet, cocooned hours that Victorians performed their most elaborate sleep theater. There were warm foot baths infused with rosemary. There were delicate perfumes, misted lightly on pillows, rosewater and benzoin, said to soothe the vapors. There were wind-down prayers, which sometimes doubled as confessions, just in case sleep should segue neatly into the eternal kind. You shift in your seat, not quite sleepy yourself. It's contagious, this Victorian fidgeting. Everyone has their own little insomnia kit. Some keep journals beside the bed. Others count church bells. A few more daring souls try autosuggestion, whispering affirmations like "I am sleepy" until they start believing it, or until someone in the next room tells them to shut it. And it worked, sometimes. But even the best rituals failed against the deeper fears that snuck in with the night. Financial ruin. Cholera. War. Social embarrassment. That one time you used the wrong fork at Lady Blithering's luncheon and someone noticed. Sleep became a performance, and failure to execute it elegantly was, in itself, a kind of shame. So you sit here now, in the dim hush of a house that tries too hard to relax, understanding that in Victorian parlors, insomnia isn't just tolerated, it's curated. Polished. Dressed up in velvet and lit by candlelight. And somewhere, under all that effort, someone might, just might, drift off. The brass bell above the door jingles softly as you step into a narrow hallway lined with faded medical prints. You're inside a Victorian doctor's office now, part clinic, part curiosity cabinet, and entirely too warm. The wallpaper has a nervous pattern, like it's not sure it wants to be floral or geometric, and there's a strong whiff of something between boiled leather and mint. Dr. Lister, or Dr. Althorpe, or Dr. Dabblethwaite, the names blur, greets you with a sleepy nod. He's wearing pince-nez spectacles, a buttoned waistcoat, and the permanent expression of a man who thinks half his patients are making it up. He gestures toward a reclining chair, though it's more of a chaise than anything you'd associate with reclining. You sit. It creaks ominously. So, he says, you can't sleep. No small talk. No pulse check. Just that flat, faintly accusatory sentence. You nod. Victorian doctors loved a tidy diagnosis. They didn't always believe insomnia was a real illness, but if it was, it had to fit into one of several predefined boxes. Overstimulated nerves, poor digestion, disrupted humors, or the all-encompassing female complaint, which covered everything from actual menopause to just having thoughts after dinner. He asks about your routine. What time you rise. Whether you've eaten cheese past dusk. Whether you pray before bed. If your mattress faces north. You begin to realize that many of his questions aren't strictly medical, they're philosophical. Sleep is, in his eyes, both a science and a symptom. Historians still argue whether Victorian physicians actually helped their patients sleep better, or if they simply reinforced the idea that sleeplessness was your own fault. A sign of spiritual imbalance, perhaps, or moral frailty, or overstudy, if you happen to be a woman who read too many pamphlets. He jots something illegible on a pad and offers you a prescription. You peer at it. It's either cod liver oil or cold lover owl. Either way, it doesn't sound restful. Still, you thank him. As you leave, you catch sight of the shelf behind his desk, a parade of blue glass bottles, each more confident in its promises than the last. Turlington's Balsam of Life. Sleepine, for the active gentleman. Dr. Moffat's Nightly Elixir, preferred by civil servants. It's an entire subgenre of hope, bottled and sold by the ounce. And they worked, kind of. Laudanum was the front-runner, of course, but there were others. Chloral hydrate, the knockout drops of choice for insomniacs and shady hotels alike. Bromides, for those who preferred their sedation with a side of constipation. And valerian root, the gentlest among them, though it did smell faintly of dirty socks and catnip. One quirky fact: a popular 1880s cure involved small doses of stramonium, an extract of the deadly nightshade plant. It was supposed to quiet the brain. It also sometimes caused hallucinations involving floating hats and conversations with dead relatives. But you did fall asleep eventually. Usually. You leave the office with a small paper packet tucked into your coat pocket, and a general sense of unease. The prescription, when you open it, turns out to be for a tonic available at any reputable chemist, and also at one disreputable apothecary known for slipping in extra morphine if you tip well. You wander the foggy street. The sky is gone from black to bruised purple, and there's a hint of morning somewhere behind the rooftops. But you're not done exploring yet. You pass another patient heading in, pale, twitchy, and wrapped in a scarf even though it's not especially cold. He eyes you like he wants to ask whether you got the good stuff. Sleep, it seems, is a shared secret. Everyone's chasing it. Few admit it out loud. But in the quiet corners of the city, behind velvet curtains and mahogany doors, people are gulping tonics, nibbling powders, and praying their racing minds will just, for once, hush. There's a sad sort of optimism to it. A hope that the right remedy is just one bottle away. You duck into a nearby bookshop, the kind open late for reasons no one really questions. There's an entire shelf marked Rest and Repose. It includes works with titles like The Science of Sleep Hygiene, Silent Slumber, A Moral Examination, and Why Worry is a Sin of the Sleepless. You flip through one at random. The advice? Try visualizing a white horse walking slowly through fog. Every time it snorts, you lose one worry. Charming! But the horse seems to have lost its way. You tuck the book back on the shelf and continue walking. Down the street, an advertisement glows faintly under gaslight, a bold promise from Dr. Eppingham's Nocturnal Nerve Wine. Sleep within 15 minutes, or your next bottle is free. Bold claim. But given that it's 25% alcohol and 10% opium, not entirely inaccurate. The thing about Victorian medicine is that it often blurred into performance. Doctors were showmen. Chemists were part illusionist. Even the names of the remedies were acts in themselves. You didn't just take pills. You took Professor Aldwich's patent nocturnals, which sounded like they should come with a brass monocle and a foghorn. And yet, despite all the drama, some treatments had charm. A bowl of warm barley water. A sprig of mint beneath the pillow. A slow walk at dusk, hand in hand with someone you didn't feel obligated to impress. You stop at a public bench. The night is still. For a moment, the city seems to exhale. And for the first time, you begin to feel it, not quite sleep, but something close. The awareness that your feet are sore, your thoughts a little fuzzed, your senses just quiet enough to let in the faintest possibility of rest. The doctor's cure may have failed. But the night itself is working on you. The street is quieter now, but the city never truly sleeps. Not here. Not in Victorian London, where the very idea of night has begun to stretch, flex, and fray under the pressure of invention. You pass a lamppost sputtering softly, like a tired sentry trying to stay awake. The gaslight flickers on cue, as if even it has insomnia. You walk past shop fronts and sleepy stoops, but it's not the fog or the silence that catches your attention, it's the smell. Rich, sharp, and strangely floral. Coffee. Not just a trace, but an entire plume of it. You follow the scent around the corner, and find yourself staring at a 2-story cafe, open late, lamps glowing like golden orbs in a sea of soot. Coffee, as it turns out, is one of the culprits in this wide-awake epidemic. The Victorians imported it by the boatload from their far-reaching colonies, Ceylon, India, the West Indies, part commodity, part cultural conquest. And they drank it with enthusiasm. By the mid-1800s, London was scattered with coffee houses, some refined and velvet-curtained, others grimy and filled with dockworkers slapping cards and cursing the Queen. You step inside one of the more genteel versions. There's a faint string quartet playing from a tinny phonograph. A waiter nods at you, assuming you're here for the usual. A stiff cup of roast, maybe a slice of almond cake, and a long, unspoken battle with your nervous system. Around you, gentlemen lean on walking sticks, ladies sip politely, and students hunch over notebooks, eyes wide, pupils like pinholes. They've all given up on sleep, trading it for stimulation. Some read newspapers with shaking hands. Others quietly scribble inventions in their notebooks. Fountain pen nibs, smokeless coal, noise-dampening gloves. Why sleep, after all, when the future is being written at 2:37 a.m. over a demitasse of East African Arabica? Historians still argue whether Victorian caffeine culture was a byproduct of empire or an engine of it. Did Britain colonize half the globe because it couldn't sit still? Or did it start twitching only after importing enough caffeine to keep a continent jittery until Tuesday? Either way, coffee became a nighttime companion for many. And not just coffee. There was also tea, green, black, oolong, all cheerfully laced with enough theine to rattle your molars. The Victorians drank tea with everything, after meals, during meetings, before bed. Some even claimed it helped them sleep, though that likely says more about their tolerance than the tea itself. There's a well-dressed man beside you with a gold watch and the haunted eyes of someone who hasn't blinked in an hour. He sips from a dainty porcelain cup and writes "Do not sleep. Greatness awaits" in the margins of his ledger. You nod in solidarity, though your own brain feels more porridge than potential. Across the cafe, a young woman in a paisley shawl reads a pamphlet titled "How to Refresh the Weary Brain." She looks skeptical. Understandably so. The Victorian publishing industry churned out pamphlets on sleep the way modern websites churn out 10 tips to hack your circadian rhythm. Quirky tidbit: one particularly bold Londoner once marketed sleep nuggets, made of compressed oats, honey, and ground cola nuts. They were supposed to calm the mind. Unfortunately, cola nuts contained caffeine. Sales were brisk but reviews were mixed. One man claimed he accidentally wallpapered his entire kitchen overnight after eating 2. You sit quietly for a moment, letting the caffeine-infused air swirl around you. It's comforting, in a way, this shared sleeplessness. There's something communal about not sleeping, especially in an age where productivity is sacred and rest is almost shameful. That shame runs deep. Rest, in this society, is reserved for the idle rich or the very ill. Everyone else is supposed to do something, preferably while looking as if they're enjoying it. Sleep? That's what you do when you've earned it. When the ledgers are balanced, the linen pressed, the empire secured. So the coffee keeps flowing. You pay your tab, a few shillings and a yawn, and step back into the chill. The street looks the same, but your mind is buzzing just a little louder. Your stomach hums. Your hands are warm. And sleep feels like a distant cousin you haven't written to in years. You pass a grocer hauling crates of produce into his shop, whistling an off-key tune. You wonder if he's just waking up, or if, like you, he simply never went to bed. Somewhere nearby, a bakery fires up its ovens. The smell of bread mixes with the last hints of coffee, and for a second, you almost forget what time it is. That's another trick of the sleepless age. The hours blur. You stop tracking them by the clock and start measuring them by bodily confusion. Did I sleep last night? You wonder. Or was that the night before? Or was it a dream involving Queen Victoria riding a bicycle? You pass a flickering gas lamp and see your own reflection ghosting in the glass. Pale, wide-eyed, and just a little amused. You look very Victorian. Congratulations. And still you walk. Sleep isn't ready to catch you just yet. Not in this caffeinated capital of contradictions. But your steps are slowing, just a little. Your thoughts, while still buzzing, now loop in softer patterns. And somewhere behind your eyes, a drowsy whisper begins to stir. You're drifting now, not quite towards sleep, but towards something softer, slower. Your feet move out of habit. The night is still stretched over London like a velvet shawl, muffling the sharpness of things. And just ahead, past the row of shops with frosted windows, a brass placard catches the light: Dr. Havelock's Electroneural Spa, rest for the modern mind. Curious. You press the buzzer. A muted clack echoes inside. Moments later, a well-dressed assistant, coiffed and starched within an inch of her existence, guides you into a softly lit reception room filled with polished mahogany, quiet ticking clocks, and the faint smell of singed hair. This is where the weird remedies begin. Welcome to the fringe frontier of Victorian insomnia, a world of gentle zaps, humming coils, and magnetic belts that promised to rebalance your nervous energies while you reclined politely and pretended not to smell burning copper. You're shown into a side chamber that resembles both a sitting room and a small laboratory. A padded reclining chair waits for you. Above it, a spider's nest of wires leading to a buzzing contraption with brass dials and something that looks suspiciously like a meat thermometer. "This won't hurt," the assistant says cheerfully, strapping a coil to your temple. "It does tingle, though." Your vision sparkles faintly. Or maybe that's just your brain trying to preserve dignity in the face of mild electrocution. Electrotherapy, in the Victorian age, was both fashionable and mysterious. It was marketed as the cure for nearly everything: nervous exhaustion, melancholy, weak digestion, and, of course, insomnia. The idea was simple: your body runs on invisible currents, and sometimes those currents need a little encouragement. Historians still argue whether these treatments did anything medically useful, or if they simply provided patients with a deeply satisfying sense of being treated. Because when your doctor straps you into a Tesla coil and says this will help you sleep, part of your brain wants to believe him, even if another part is wondering whether your eyebrows will survive. After 15 minutes of gentle zapping, you're given a glass of something herbal and asked to fill out a satisfaction card. You tick the box for mildly relaxed, because there isn't an option for uncertain but oddly hopeful. You aren't alone in your desperation. In the corner, a man snoozes peacefully under a pyramid-shaped copper helmet. Across from him, a woman has her hands immersed in a tray of lukewarm galvanized tonic water while reciting verses from Tennyson. You suspect she's been told it helps with spiritual cleansing, or possibly just keeps her occupied. Quirky tidbit: one particularly ambitious inventor patented a clockwork sleep machine in 1879. It was a wind-up device that slowly lowered a padded weight onto your chest while playing a lullaby through tiny bells. Supposedly, it mimicked the calming pressure of a mother's embrace. In practice, it mostly caused confusion and the occasional cracked rib. Still, Victorians adored novelty. And the more bizarre the cure, the more likely someone in Bloomsbury or Kensington would give it a try. You rise from the electro-chair slightly buzzed but mostly intact. Outside the spa, the sky is beginning to hint at morning with a pale bruising at the edge. Your breath fogs gently. A milk cart rattles down the lane. You pass a billboard: "Sleep at last." Magnetic slumber bands now available in 4 colors. These cures weren't always about actual results. They were about hope. About control. About feeling like you were doing something, anything, to combat the creeping dread of another sleepless night. You walk on, your thoughts humming in rhythm with the static still lingering in your scalp. It's oddly comforting. Like your head has joined a barbershop quartet and refuses to stop rehearsing. You duck into a park as the first birds begin to rustle in the trees. The grass glistens faintly with dew. There's a bench here, cast iron and wood, slightly damp but inviting. You sit. Your mind drifts to all the other treatments being tried across the city right now: foot massages with eucalyptus oil, inhaling steam from boiled lavender, even the practice of writing down one's dreams before sleeping in hopes that the body will take the hint. Some of these methods have ancient roots. Others were conjured out of desperation by entrepreneurial minds with more ambition than ethics. You remember reading once that one Victorian doctor claimed he could cure insomnia with compressed bedtime air. Essentially, it was a bellows system that delivered garden-variety oxygen through a goose-feather tube. When asked if it actually helped, he reportedly replied, "Well, it doesn't hurt." That was the era's unofficial motto. The light grows stronger now. A soft pink cuts through the mist, brushing rooftops with reluctant optimism. Somewhere, a church bell rings. Not a jarring clang, but a mellow tone, like a spoon tapping porcelain. You breathe deeply. You're still not asleep. But the idea of sleep no longer feels like a far-off myth. It feels like a story you've heard before, one with slow turns and gentle rhythms, and the kind of ending that doesn't need to surprise you, only soothe you. The fringe cures, for all their oddities, taught Victorians something subtle but profound: that even the act of trying to sleep can be its own comfort. That rituals, no matter how strange, can soften the edges of a long night. You stretch your legs. The pigeons are just beginning to wake. And in a world buzzing with cures and quackery, sometimes what you really need is a quiet bench, a tired mind, and the first gold of sunrise. Your feet carry you past the park and into a winding residential street where the air smells faintly of coal smoke and overboiled cabbage. The houses here are more modest, terraced homes with narrow stoops and lace curtains. Each one is a neatly wrapped package of someone else's quiet routine. You pass an open window where the light is just beginning to shift from gas lamp glow to pale morning gray, and inside, a woman adjusts the sheets on a narrow bed with the precision of someone who believes sleep can be summoned with symmetry. You've entered the world of potions and powders now, the vast, fragrant, and occasionally questionable empire of Victorian self-medication. No two households have the same routine. But almost every dresser has a bottle, and every nightstand a tin, promising the same elusive reward, rest. You duck into a local apothecary, its door creaking like it hasn't seen oil in a decade. The shop smells like licorice, herbs, and the ghost of something flammable. The shelves are lined with neatly labeled jars, tins, bottles, and mysterious lozenges wrapped in waxed paper. You pick one up at random, Dr. Cornelius's Nocturne Pearls, forced sleep of the purest kind, and try not to read too deeply into that marketing strategy. The man behind the counter looks as though he hasn't blinked since Victoria took the throne. He nods at you solemnly, then begins listing options without prompting. Paregoric syrup, tincture of hops, Indian hemp cordial, syrup of poppies, Mrs. Winthrop's night draught, gentler than most. No chloral hydrate in that one. You choose a modest tin of herbal pastilles. The label says they're infused with valerian, passion flower, and something called soothing dust. You don't ask questions. Valerian, you recall, was one of the more respectable insomnia cures of the age. An herbal sedative, it had a long pedigree in folk medicine and was even recommended by physicians who distrusted opiates. Still, it had its drawbacks, namely, the smell, which hovered somewhere between well-worn socks and anxious ferrets. Historians still argue whether these gentler sleep aids genuinely worked or simply acted as a kind of edible placebo, a ritual more than a remedy. You take one pastille now, chewing it slowly. It tastes like damp licorice stored next to a mothball tin. As you continue browsing, the apothecary shows you a sampler box, a collection of pills in different pastel shades, each one labeled with dreamy euphemisms: driftlets, cloud buttons, midnight quiet, somna drops. It's like a candy box designed by someone who's been awake for 3 straight nights. And tucked between all these fanciful sleep aids are the heavy hitters, the tinctures and powders laced with opium, morphine, or chloral hydrate. You're reminded of the story about Charles Dickens, who reportedly used laudanum to quiet his nerves during difficult spells. Of course, he also wrote ghost stories, so perhaps his dreams weren't always restful. One particularly eyebrow-raising remedy you spot is sleeping popcorn, small, sugar-coated nuggets infused with powdered poppy extract, meant to be nibbled during an evening stroll. Popular among theatergoers, apparently. You imagine falling asleep during the second act of a Shakespeare play, and waking up with sonnets stuck to your forehead. Quirky tidbit: there was once a sleep syrup called moo milk, which claimed to be blessed by monks and stirred exclusively under full moons. Its main ingredient? Whiskey and nutmeg. Blessed or not, it was banned after too many people tried to replace dinner with it. You thank the apothecary and step back into the cool morning. The city is just beginning to wake, chimneys burp faint puffs into the sky, and the sound of a distant kettle whistle rises above the rooftops. Your steps feel slower now. Heavy, but not unpleasant. Like your thoughts are wrapped in wool. You pass a woman sweeping her stoop. She nods to you, then pours something from a brown bottle into her tea. Eases the nerves, she says, not quite making eye contact. You suspect her tea contains a generous splash of Dr. Merton's night cordial. It's hard to say which is more comforting, the medicine itself, or the rituals that surround it. The careful opening of the bottle. The slow stir into hot milk. The soft clink of the spoon. The way the city, so noisy and insistent by day, becomes a gentle conspirator in these midnight ceremonies. You think back to your own nightstand. What would you keep there, in a different century? A vial of lavender? A soft cloth soaked in camphor? A single chocolate truffle, wrapped in gold foil and laced with something mildly sedative? That's another curious thing. Victorians didn't always separate medicine from pleasure. Many of the sleep aids came in pleasant forms: sweet syrups, flavored lozenges, candied herbs. Some were even baked into biscuits or stirred into cocoa. If you didn't know better, you'd think they were trying to lull you into rest with comfort, not chemistry. Imagine that. You round a corner and pass a boy on a delivery bicycle, balancing a box stamped Mulliner's Night tablets. Wake no more, unless roused by fire. You chuckle softly. It's the kind of tagline that would probably get someone arrested today. Sleep, to the Victorians, wasn't just a bodily function, it was a problem to be solved, an achievement to be won. And they approached it with a sort of sleepy optimism, trying every tincture and tonic under the moon. And perhaps, just perhaps, you're beginning to see why. The edges of the city are blurring now. Or maybe that's just your thoughts, finally softening. The morning light creeps down the alley walls like honey. You're still awake, but something's shifting. The night isn't fighting you anymore. You find yourself in a part of London that doesn't exist on most maps. A strange little corridor of old houses turned private clinics. A place where the respectable and the ridiculous blend with astonishing ease. Welcome to the world of unconventional Victorian sleep cures. Or, as one skeptical newspaper put it in 1885, a theater of hopeful nonsense. You knock on a door marked simply Somnambulist's Rest. It opens with an almost suspicious speed. A narrow-faced man with the look of an underfed poet ushers you inside. He introduces himself as Mr. Cattermole, practitioner of neuromagnetic repose. His handshake is dry, his shoes unnecessarily shiny, and he leads you into a chamber filled with velvet chaise lounges, potted ferns, and copper instruments that might be decorative, or potentially dangerous. Tonight, he says in a breathy tone, you shall experience alignment. You nod, because what else is there to do? He begins with magnet therapy. A polished horseshoe magnet is slowly passed over your limbs while he whispers affirmations about harmony, balance, and curiously, the digestive properties of figs. You don't feel especially magnetic. But the air is warm and the lighting flattering, so you let him get on with it. Victorians adored these sorts of treatments, not just because they promised relief, but because they felt theatrical. They transformed rest into an event. This wasn't medicine. It was ritual. A performance that let the exhausted believe they were participating in something both ancient and profound. Historians still argue whether these fringe practitioners truly believed in their methods, or if they simply knew that belief itself could sometimes be enough. After all, if the mind could keep you awake, perhaps the mind could also put you to sleep, with just the right number of crystals and copper coils. Next comes the onion cure. Yes, really? Mr. Cattermole excuses himself, then returns triumphantly with a small satchel. He opens it with a flourish and reveals 2 thin slices of raw onion, which he gently places inside a velvet pouch. This, he explains, is to be tied to your bedpost, or, in moments of acute restlessness, laid directly on the chest. Absorbs errant thoughts, he assures you, and softens the pulse. Quirky tidbit. There are actual case reports of this method being recommended by fringe health gurus in 1870s Yorkshire. It never caught on widely, but it lingers in the margins of old health almanacs, between the recipes for herbal poultices and cautions about the dangers of tight corsets. You politely pocket the pouch and return to your velvet lounge. Now comes the final act, music therapy. Mr. Cattermole winds up a phonograph, an elegantly clunky contraption, and places the needle on a recording labeled whale calls and psalms. What follows is a hauntingly slow dirge played on harmonium and recorder, interspersed with the faint sound of someone humming what might be a lullaby, or just practicing vowel sounds. You feel confused, but also oddly relaxed. Like your brain is shrugging and saying, fine. Let's just roll with it. The whole experience lasts about an hour, after which Mr. Cattermole thanks you with the gravity of a man concluding a sacred rite. He offers you a pamphlet, 21 Days to Dreamlike Excellence, and suggests journaling your progress using his proprietary ink, which contains mildly soporific botanical residue. You promise to consider it. Back outside, the sky is brightening, though the streets remain hushed. You walk slowly, feeling like you've just emerged from a very polite séance. One where the spirits couldn't be bothered to show up, but everyone still enjoyed the biscuits. The truth is, Victorian London had no shortage of characters like Mr. Cattermole. The fringe sleep economy was booming. Magnetists, mesmerists, aroma peddlers, spiritualists, even early hypnotists all claimed to offer peace in a restless age. And they weren't just conning the gullible. Many were genuinely trying. Sleep was elusive, after all, and people were desperate. Some believed that a perfectly timed yawn, delivered in front of a mirror under moonlight, could reset your inner clock. Others swore by the horizontal recitation method, in which one murmured the Lord's Prayer while lying exactly 17 degrees off axis from due north. One Londoner supposedly installed an elaborate pulley system that lowered a stuffed swan from the ceiling at 3 a.m. to startle the spirit into rest. His neighbors complained. But he claimed to sleep like a baby. You pass a woman hanging lavender sprigs on her window latch. She hums softly, and the scent drifts towards you like an invisible lullaby. Maybe it's working. Maybe it's all nonsense. But in this moment, it really doesn't matter. Sleep has never been purely scientific. It's myth. It's ritual. It's hope dressed in herbal tea and nonsense poetry. And in the heart of a city that never stops moving, these strange little practices, no matter how ridiculous, offered something precious: the illusion of control. You pocket the onion pouch, just in case. You meander now through quieter streets, where the clatter of horse hooves has softened to an echo and the bakeries are opening their shutters with yawns of wood and iron. But your attention shifts away from the world outside and towards something more intimate: the bedroom. Not yours, precisely, but the Victorian bedroom, that strange, sacred battleground where so many nightly skirmishes with insomnia were fought. Victorians didn't just sleep in bedrooms, they curated them, staged them, judged them. The arrangement of your bedroom said something about your character. Disorder was suspicious. Comfort could be immoral. You were expected to suffer just enough for decency, but not so much that your complexion suffered. You let yourself into a modest but respectable home, the kind owned by a clerk or a grammar school headmaster. Upstairs, a bedroom waits. The bed dominates the space, not in size, but in presence. It's an iron frame with brass knobs and a high headboard. The mattress, stuffed with horsehair, is both springy and mysteriously lumpy. The pillow smells faintly of violets and camphor. And this bed, oddly enough, may be your worst enemy. You settle onto the edge of it with a creak. There are rules here, too. For starters, the Victorians had very particular ideas about mattress orientation. Facing east was thought to promote serenity. Facing west was discouraged. Some believed it disrupted electrical flows in the body. North was ideal for those recovering from illness, and south, well, let's not speak of south. The bedclothes are layered like a trifle: sheet, quilt, counterpane, and a fringed bedspread heavy enough to suppress rebellion. Underneath, a warming pan filled with coals has long since cooled. You can almost feel the residual heat, like a fading memory of comfort. Wallpaper is important too. Many Victorians believed certain patterns could disturb the nerves. Loud florals? Too stimulating. Busy stripes? Aggravating. Tiny ferns in symmetrical patterns? Ideal. One popular theory claimed that soothing wallpaper reduced mental velocity, which is a polite way of saying it made you too bored to stay awake. The window is cracked open a mere inch for fresh air, but not too much. Victorians were terribly afraid of miasma, those invisible clouds of corruption believed to float through open windows and cause everything from insomnia to gout. You draw the curtain back and see that it's made of a thick velvet meant to block the moon. Some even swore by blue curtains, believing they promoted calm thoughts and lessened the risk of night terrors. Historians still argue whether these environment-focused beliefs were genuinely therapeutic, or just elaborate forms of psychological theater. But many Victorians swore by them. In an era of few certainties, controlling your environment was a small rebellion against the chaos of the waking world. You lie back now. The room smells faintly of lavender sachets tucked between the sheets, a time-honored custom. A bell pull hangs next to the bed, in case you require a servant, or, more likely, a cup of warm milk and moral support. On the nightstand is a small bottle of slumber essence, a blend of rosewater, cloves, and just a hint of alcohol. You dab a bit on your wrist. It's sticky, but oddly comforting. Let's not forget the sounds. If you were rich, you might have had carpets to absorb creaks and whispers. But many middle-class homes had wooden floors and thin walls. You'd hear everything: a neighbor's cough, the snore of a father-in-law down the hall, the click of your sisters knitting needles in the room next door. And in the city, there was always something: a distant bell, the clink of milk bottles, the rattle of a late cab. To combat this, some Victorians turned to what we'd now call ambient noise. Wind chimes, a dripping tap, even pet birds, whose gentle chirps were thought to calm the nerves. You pass a cage in the corner of the room. The budgie inside is asleep, fluffed like a cloud. Lucky bird. One quirky innovation? Bed boots. These were literal shoes made of quilted fabric, worn to bed to keep your feet warm in the absence of reliable indoor heating. Paired with fingerless gloves and a modesty cap, you'd go to bed looking less like someone preparing to dream and more like someone preparing to haunt a Dickens novel. And yet, even with all of this, the sleep still didn't come easily. That's the heart of it. Despite the lavender and linen and wallpaper that whispered promises of tranquility, you still lay awake, counting shadows and blinking at the ceiling. Insomnia didn't care how many cushions you fluffed. You shift under the imagined weight of those bedclothes, imagining yourself as one of the thousands of Victorians lying in this exact pose, wondering if sleep might arrive tonight. Wondering if it was your digestion, or your thoughts, or that letter you left unsent, or the wallpaper, or the shoes, or the onions. Because in the Victorian bedroom, everything was suspect. Everything had the potential to unbalance the fragile scale of sleep. It wasn't just about the mind or the body. It was about creating a perfect harmony of everything. And if you failed, you tried again the next night. With a new pillow angle, or a different nightshirt, or a change in the pattern of your bedtime prayer. The room dims as the clouds shift outside. You turn over, the imaginary sheets whispering under your weight. Maybe you think, just maybe, this would be the night. The cobbles are uneven beneath your feet now as you wander deeper into London's sleeping, or more accurately, not sleeping, skeleton. The fog lifts slightly, revealing a row of squat buildings with crooked chimneys and signs hand-painted in fading ink. You've wandered far from the gaslit parlors and lavender-scented bedrooms. Welcome to the part of the city where insomnia isn't a fashionable complaint, it's a simple fact of life. You're in the workhouse district now. The air is colder here, more solid, like it remembers things it doesn't want to talk about. You pass by the looming brick facade of a poorhouse, one of many scattered throughout the city. It hums with quiet tension, not the kind of buzz from activity, but the static hum of too many people packed too closely together, sharing air, fatigue, and not nearly enough space. Inside, the conditions are stark. Thin mattresses. Rows of iron-framed beds, inches apart. No privacy. No softness. The walls are stained with damp, and the single shared window is too grimy to let in anything more useful than a gray smear of morning. Here, insomnia isn't discussed. It's endured. You move quietly between rows of beds in the men's ward. Some are asleep, or pretending to be. Others lie flat-eyed, staring up into the dark, faces blank. There's a particular kind of stillness in this space, not restful, but resigned. The Victorians had many ideas about sleeplessness, but these ideas rarely included the working poor. For them, not sleeping wasn't a philosophical crisis, it was just another unrecorded hardship. Sleep, if it came, was fitful, cold, interrupted by coughs, footsteps, and the involuntary twitching of overworked muscles. Historians still argue whether the state intentionally designed workhouses to be as uncomfortable as possible, to discourage so-called idleness. But many agree that sleep was often seen as a luxury the poor simply didn't deserve. You walk now through the women's quarters. A child stirs beside her mother, whimpering softly. There are no feather pillows here. Just folded coats, or nothing at all. Women press close to one another for warmth, an awkward tangle of shawls and elbows. A few feet away, an older woman mutters into her sleep, or perhaps dreams aloud. It's hard to tell. And in this space, you notice something peculiar. Despite the hardship, despite the cold, despite the smell of boiled rags and lye soap, there's a kind of intimacy. The kind that only grows when people are forced to rest near each other, night after night. Sleep is communal here, not private. Not elegant or curated. Just raw and necessary. Quirky tidbit. There were charitable societies in London that offered penny sleeps. For 1 coin, you could curl up on a straw mat in a dim shelter. For 2 pennies, you got a hammock. And for 4, a cot with an actual blanket. It wasn't luxury. But for some, it was the first real rest in days. You think of the contrast now. The sleepless aristocrat in his quilted nightgown, sniffing lavender and adjusting his pillow. And here, a seamstress who worked 16 hours straight, now curled under a thin scrap of wool, fast asleep not because she's soothed, but because her body simply has nothing left to give. It's easy to forget that most of London didn't have the luxury to debate sleep etiquette. They took what they could get. A nap during a lunch break. A doze on a warehouse floor. Even a moment of unconsciousness on the back of a rumbling delivery cart. Sleep was stolen, not earned. You pass a narrow doorway and see 3 boys, barely teenagers, sleeping upright against the wall, knees pulled to their chests. They stir only slightly as you step around them. One mumbles something about bread. Another scratches at a flea. None wake. And still, somehow, they sleep. Because the body, even when mistreated, has its own strange wisdom. It takes rest where it can. It knits itself back together in short bursts. It makes peace with discomfort, if only to keep going a little longer. You find yourself outside again. The sun is rising slowly now, and the rooftops glow with a dull orange wash. The workhouse behind you fades into the city's morning rhythm. Soon the doors will open. Some will leave in search of work. Some will simply wander. Others will wait for evening, when they'll return and try again to rest in those narrow iron beds. Victorian society may have catalogued insomnia like a fashionable disease, but in these streets, it was just one more background ache. Like hunger, like blisters, like hope that had worn too thin. You walk quietly now, your own feet lighter somehow, as though you've carried a piece of that night with you. The kind that isn't softened by herbal teas or electric chairs, but by necessity. And as the city groans awake around you, you can't help but wonder, maybe real sleep comes not from chasing it, but from letting go. The sunlight is stretching slowly across the cobbles now, seeping into cracks and puddles, banishing the last misty wisps of night. The streets begin to stir in earnest. And with the return of bustle comes another world, one that rarely appeared in sleep manuals or fashionable doctors' pamphlets, but which shaped a good portion of Victorian sleeplessness nonetheless, the world of women. You slip quietly into a townhouse where the day has already begun. There's the creak of a floorboard, the faint splash of water from a basin, the shuffle of slippers across the rug. You follow the sounds up a flight of stairs to a small but tidy bedroom. A woman, young, pale, her hair pinned with almost obsessive neatness, sits by the window embroidering in the half-light. She hasn't slept. She won't mention it, though. Not unless you ask. And even then, she'll likely smile and say, "Oh, I suppose I just couldn't get comfortable." What she means is that her thoughts refuse to stop parading through her skull like judgmental relatives. In Victorian homes, women's sleep, or the lack of it, was rarely treated with the same medical curiosity as men's. It was either dismissed or pathologized. If a man couldn't sleep, he was overworked, overstimulated, perhaps a genius. If a woman couldn't sleep, it was hysteria. Or worse, a lack of piety. Or too much reading. Historians still argue whether Victorian medicine ever fully understood, or wanted to understand, The psychological load that women carried. The endless caregiving, emotional labor, social posturing. Add in a corset or two and a fear of spinsterhood, and it's no surprise many women found the night more torturous than tranquil. You glance around her room. On the nightstand is a copy of Household Words, open to a page titled Sleep for the Anxious Lady. The advice includes a cold compress on the chest, a teaspoon of camphor syrup, and should all else fail, 3 chapters of a geography textbook read aloud by your housemaid. She tried it all. None of it worked. Now she embroiders quietly, threading order into chaos. The pattern is delicate, ivy leaves, tiny birds, but you can see the tension in each stitch. Her fingers move with mechanical precision, the way some people breathe or pray. Her eyes stay focused, not on the fabric, but on something far away. She isn't alone in this. Countless Victorian women turned to quiet crafts as a way to cope with sleeplessness. Needlework, lace-making, letter-writing. Activities that require just enough concentration to keep the mind from spiraling, but not so much as to fully engage it. Like rocking yourself to sleep with your hands. Quirky tidbit: some women swore by what was called moon bathing, sitting in moonlight in a white nightgown and brushing their hair exactly 100 times. It was believed to draw out nervous energy and make the soul more porous to dreams. It also terrified passing neighbors, but that was their problem. Downstairs, a baby cries. The woman sighs and stands, her hand moving instinctively to the small of her back. She has 3 children. One is teething. One has night terrors. The third sleepwalks into wardrobes. She's up every 2 hours, not with drama, but with practiced, half-blind movements, the soft steps of a mother who no longer expects sleep, only intervals between duties. She boils milk, adds nutmeg, and stirs it with a weary grace. A nursing shawl is draped over the back of the chair. A faint scorch mark lingers on the stovetop from yesterday's hurried breakfast. And somewhere in the background, a mantel clock ticks with the smug indifference of something that never loses time. You wander through the rooms of the house like a ghost, watching the unspoken rituals unfold. A teenage daughter dabs her eyes after reading a letter from a suitor. A grandmother mutters over her knitting. A maid slips upstairs with a fresh basin of water and a face so tired she barely notices you. Sleep in this house is not a goal. It's an occasional visitor. And when it does arrive, it's broken into pieces, naps caught between chores, quick collapses after midnight, the brief, sweet nothingness of sitting down too long in a warm room. Victorian culture rarely acknowledged this fractured rest. Women were expected to be the keepers of calm, the architects of the household's mood. If they were tired, it was their fault. If they were irritable, it was unseemly. And if they couldn't sleep, they were quietly recommended a change of air, the 19th century equivalent of "have you tried turning yourself off and on again?" One doctor wrote that sleeplessness in women could often be cured by removal from embroidery and poetry. He prescribed instead walks in the countryside, boiled beef, and sermons. You glance again at the woman by the window. She's still stitching, though now her eyelids are heavier, her movements slower. Perhaps she'll nap after breakfast. Or after lunch. Or not at all. She doesn't expect rest. She simply waits for it, like one waits for a carriage on a foggy road, watching the horizon, listening for wheels that may never come. And yet, despite everything, she continues. Because that's what Victorian women did. They adapted. They folded their exhaustion into silence, stitched their frustration into tea cozies, and bore their sleepless nights with the kind of weary dignity that would make your eyelids ache just watching it. You tiptoe back out into the street. The sun is rising properly now. But you carry that image with you, a woman awake before the city, calm in her tiredness, resilient without applause. And as you walk, you wonder just how many of them there were, stitching, stirring, surviving, when the rest of the world was busy diagnosing them. The streets are warming now, touched by golden slants of sunlight, the fog burning off like a retreating army. You've crossed from the cramped flats of the clerks and the invisible burdens of housewives into a part of town where sleep, it seems, was always too big for one person alone. You approach a quainton on the outskirts of London proper, one with a rather famous claim to fame, at least among those who collect odd facts and even odder furniture. The carved wooden sign swings gently in the breeze, reading, "The Great Bed of Ware, resting place to kings, knaves, and far too many feet." This, quite literally, is where Victorians came to sleep together, not in the scandalous sense, though certainly some of that too, but in the logistical, communal, elbows in the ribs sense. The Great Bed of Ware was famous long before the Victorians came along. Crafted in the late 1500s, it boasted such a vast sleeping surface that it could, and frequently did, accommodate 4 couples at once. 8 people. 1 mattress. No partitions. No personal bubbles. You step into the room where the bed dominates the space like an oaken island. It's absurdly ornate, carved with mythical creatures and stiff-looking floral motifs. The posts are thick enough to support a roof. The mattress is the size of a dance floor. And you can't help but laugh, just the tiniest bit, at the idea of calling this restful. In an age obsessed with etiquette, it's astonishing how common shared sleeping was. Inns, poorhouses, even middle-class homes often required bed sharing. Siblings, travelers, strangers, if there was room, you took it. Sleep was social, sometimes awkwardly so. Quirky tidbit. There were stories of innkeepers renting out beds not by the night, but by the slice, charging half price for a corner nap if you didn't mind someone's boots by your knees. In larger homes, bed sharing still happened, especially for children and servants. Entire households revolved around nighttime logistics. Who slept where, with whom, and for how long. Privacy was rare, and your own bed wasn't a given, it was a privilege. Even in wealthier households, guests might find themselves sharing with cousins, in-laws, or that one friend who talked in their sleep and claimed to dream of hedge mazes. The Victorians didn't necessarily like communal sleeping, but they tolerated it. You got in, you curled up, and you pretended not to notice when someone sneezed into your pillow. Historians still argue whether this bed-sharing culture truly disappeared in the Victorian period or simply became more cleverly disguised. While industrialization encouraged individualism, your own room, your own schedule, housing shortages and familial obligations kept many under the same quilt longer than they might have liked. You run your hand along the frame of the massive bed. The wood is worn smooth in places. You imagine the generations of sleepers, merchants, newlyweds, diplomats with snoring problems. Some probably slept well out of sheer exhaustion. Others stared at the ceiling wondering if the person next to them was stealing all the blanket on purpose. The idea of shared sleep raises a question that even modern science still puzzles over. Is sleeping alone more restful, or are we wired for the quiet comfort of a nearby human breath? Back then, at least, you didn't get much of a choice. You sit down on the edge of the great bed and let the bounce of its ancient springs nudge your spine. The mattress dips and sways like a shallow sea. It's ridiculous, really. Charming, in its own oversized, mildly absurd way. Nearby, a handwritten guest log is filled with entries. Some polite. Some effusive. One simply reads, "Too many feet." Another, "Dreamt of roast goose. Woke up chewing someone's sleeve." There's something refreshing about it all, how sleep, that deeply private state, could be so openly shared, even laughed about. For all its discomforts, communal sleeping had its advantages. Safety, warmth, even companionship. And in a world where loneliness could be a quiet killer, perhaps that mattered more than we think. You rise from the bed and glance back one more time. It's still absurd. But in a strange way, it represents something deeply human, our willingness to adapt, to compromise, to close our eyes next to someone we barely know and say, "Well, let's give it a go." You step back outside, the innkeeper waving to you with a yawn. Across the road, a milk cart rolls by. Birds chirp with the confident energy of creatures who never worry about sleep. And as the sun climbs higher, you wonder, not for the first time, if maybe we've lost something in all our individualized bedtime rituals. Something messy, but also deeply comforting. Because sometimes, the best sleep isn't the quietest. Sometimes, it's just knowing you're not alone under the blanket. You're further from the city center now, walking a quiet lane where ivy curls over garden gates and the air carries the smell of coal smoke, rose bushes, and maybe just a hint of manure. The homes here are well kept but not ostentatious, the sort of place where the new middle class has finally planted its roots. Clerks, teachers, respectable widows with respectable habits. It's in one such home that you slip through a front door left carelessly ajar and find yourself in a small study. There's a ticking wall clock, a coal fire that's gone to ash, and a diary left open on the desk. The page is dated October 3, 1888. You read. Slept only 4 hours. Woke at 2:17. Recited psalms. Tried counting chimney pots in my head. Failed. Took half dose of the cordials. Felt muzzy. Dreamed I was late to church and naked. Again. It's one of many entries. The diary is filled not with juicy secrets or scandals, but with data. Wake times. Sleep lengths. Dream summaries. One entry includes a small diagram of the bed layout, annotated with arrows. Too many blankets overheating nightmare about onions. This, you realize, is no ordinary journal. You've discovered the very Victorian practice of sleep charting. In a century obsessed with self-improvement, it was only a matter of time before sleep became something to monitor, measure, and if possible, optimize. You flip through more pages, each one cataloging hours slept, methods attempted, mood upon waking. Some even rank dreams by intensity, with little doodled stars. It's oddly charming, and oddly familiar. We think of sleep tracking as modern, a smartwatch, an app, a graph with colored bars. But here, scribbled in fountain pen, are the same instincts: control, documentation, hope. Historians still argue whether this early self-monitoring helped or hindered rest. Did the tracking soothe anxiety by creating routine? Or did it make people more anxious, lying awake wondering what they'd write down the next morning? Victorian brains, it turns out, were just as busy as yours. You turn another page and find a list titled Experiments Conducted This Week. The handwriting is neat, the tone quietly desperate. It reads: cold compress on forehead, failed. Sleeping with socks soaked in gin, unclear. Imagining self as a ship in calm sea, worked until imagined sea monster. Whispered the word sleep 147 times. Slept after 148. Try again? Quirky tidbit. There was an actual published guide in 1891 titled The Sleep Log, for ladies, clergymen, and other nervous persons, complete with templated pages to record one's bedtime, last meal, thoughts, and dreams. It sold moderately well and was occasionally found under tea trays in upper-class guest rooms. You continue your tour of the house. In the bedroom, you find another oddity, a framed chart mounted near the headboard. It's a sleep position graph, a kind of early ergonomic experiment. It lists positions from the bishop, hands folded on chest, to the swooning maiden, dramatic lean, one leg draped over pillow. There are check marks next to each one, as if someone has been testing them with the seriousness of a scientist. Downstairs, on the kitchen table, there's a small stack of returned library books. The titles? Restorative Sleep, A Civilized Approach, Moral Terrors of the Sleepless, and On the Virtue of a Short Nap After Pudding. Clearly, this house takes its insomnia seriously. But not without humor. One note, scrawled on a slip of paper and pinned above the pantry, reads: if you find me staring into the fire at 4 a.m., do not ask questions. Simply hand me biscuits. That, too, feels familiar. As you walk back into the study, you imagine the person who kept this diary, someone determined, perhaps a little obsessive, but ultimately hopeful. The kind of person who believes that just by trying hard enough, you can deserve sleep. You can earn it. Tame it. Log it into submission. But of course, sleep doesn't work that way. The more you chase it, the faster it ducks around the corner. Still, the ritual of recording, that quiet self-dialogue, has its own kind of magic. There's comfort in the routine. In the turning down of the bedclothes. In writing, slept poorly. Tried again. Because it means you haven't given up. You pocket a folded copy of one of the charts. It's titled Hours of Sleep and Degree of Hopefulness. You laugh softly. You might need this. Outside, the sun is higher now. The streets are alive again with children's shouts and the rhythmic clop of horse-drawn carts. But in your pocket is a reminder. Even in an age of lace and laudanum, people were still tracking their hopes, one half-slept hour at a time. And maybe, just maybe, sleep is less about the hours and more about the trying, the noticing, the marking of time with gentleness instead of judgment. You walk on, wondering whether you should start a sleep journal of your own. Just as long as it includes space for drawing sea monsters. Your next steps take you along a bustling road now fully claimed by morning. Vendors shout half-hearted greetings over mounds of turnips, horses snort into their bridles, and a bootblack whistles a tune that can't quite decide if it's cheerful or tired. You're heading toward the part of the Victorian world that didn't merely discuss sleep, it sold it. Boldly, colorfully, and with confidence rarely backed by results. Welcome to the booming business of sleep advertising. You step into a corner shop, part chemist, part curiosity emporium. The walls are lined with posters, leaflets, and placards trumpeting every imaginable cure for sleeplessness. It's an absolute riot of promises, restful nights, soothing dreams, and slumbers so deep your ancestors feel it. There's Dr. Pellington's pillow perfume. 2 drops and you drift like a cloud over Venice. Next to it, Gaskell's slumber oil, as effective as a lullaby and twice as legal. And then Mr. Stubbs' soporific soap, which claims its lavender scent will lure the eyelids shut before your teeth are brushed. You pick up a pamphlet printed in elegant copperplate script. The True Terrors of Tossing, How One Gentleman Conquered Restlessness with Rhubarb Wine and Psalms. It's 20 pages long. 7 of them are testimonials. 4 of them are just drawings of a man snoring happily beside a candelabra. Victorian insomnia advertising was a marvel of restrained hysteria. Products were marketed with genteel urgency. You weren't just buying a tonic, you were saving yourself from decline. And perhaps more importantly, you were demonstrating that you cared enough to try. Historians still argue whether this explosion of sleep-related marketing created more anxiety than it soothed. After all, if you're bombarded with promises that this bottle will solve everything, you might begin to wonder what's wrong with you if it doesn't. You browse further. In the back of the shop is a wooden cabinet labeled for the discerning sleeper. Inside you find silk eye masks, sachets stuffed with mugwort, and something called a dream flute, essentially a hollow reed meant to be blown before bed to signal the brain toward dormancy. The sales tag adds helpfully. May also serve as whistle in case of fire. Of course, not all marketing was subtle. Some was full-on theatrical. Traveling salesmen known as remedy riders would set up tents in public squares, perform hypnotic demonstrations, then pass out samples of their patented sleep elixirs, usually strong enough to stun a mule. You remember reading about one such elixir, Reverend Gribbleton's Heavenly Night Drops. It was advertised in newspapers with taglines like, "Don't just sleep. Slumber in the arms of an angel, certified by Bishop Keating." Quirky tidbit, one London apothecary offered free samples of a sleep potion laced with mint, camphor, and something labeled quieting salts. After several customers reported dreams of parsnips and spiritual ecstasy, it was quietly removed from shelves, though not before gaining a small cult following among poets. Advertising crept into domestic spaces, too. Magazines aimed at women ran serialized ads dressed up as bedtime stories. Lady Belinda's Last Insomnia, one title read, in which the heroine finally sleeps thanks to a linden flower compress and a gentleman caller who recommends thistledown elixir for dreaming with dignity. And then there were the influencers of the era, trusted actors, clergymen, and, oddly enough, retired admirals. If an admiral said a thing helped him sleep, well, it must work. Who were you to argue with a man who navigated the Suez? You pass a newspaper stand and glance at the broadsheets. There's an ad running right next to the latest parliamentary scandal. Sir Fellingham recommends Night Begone. After a lifetime of cannon fire, only Night Begone lets him dream again. The illustration shows a mustachioed man reclining peacefully with a single tear of relief slipping down his cheek. You can't help but smile. The Victorian marketplace wasn't just selling sleep. It was selling reassurance. It was whispering, "You are not alone. We see your tired eyes. Here, try this." Whether it worked or not almost didn't matter. The promise itself had power. Even the bottles and boxes became part of the ritual. Elaborately designed labels, embossed lettering, ribbon corks, all to make the nightly act of seeking sleep feel dignified, even luxurious. You weren't dosing yourself with sedatives. You were partaking in a sacred ceremony. And if that failed, well, there was always tomorrow's miracle. You exit the shop and step back into the street. Sunlight bounces off window panes. Church bells toll in the distance. And somewhere, a young woman tears a sleep ad from the newspaper, folds it carefully, and tucks it into her purse like a talisman. You don't judge. You understand. You've wandered this sleepy path long enough now to know that sometimes, belief is the first step toward rest. And if it takes a soap, a slogan, and a pinch of sugared valerian to make it happen, so be it. By now, the city is in full swing, trams rattling past, fruit stalls shouting prices into the wind, and chimneys exhaling the first smoke of breakfast fires. But you're no longer quite in step with it. You've walked too far into the night, drifted too deeply through dusty apothecaries and velvet-curtained bedrooms, to fully wake up just yet. So instead, you slip down a side alley, a narrow cut between buildings where the air feels older, quieter. And ahead of you, a sign sways gently above a small, ivy-wrapped doorway. Mind Unwinding, Society of Magnetic Repose, Hypnotic Training, and General Stillness. Inside, the room is low-lit and lined with chairs in a semicircle. There are no bottles, no beds, no clocks ticking judgmentally on the wall. Just chairs and one small dais in the center. A woman in a paisley shawl greets you with a nod. "Welcome," she says softly. "You're just in time for the 9:15 trance." You settle into a chair. A hush falls over the room. This is hypnosis. Or mesmerism. Or mind quieting. It goes by many names in the Victorian world, and no one entirely agrees on whether it's science, performance, or something in between. The man who takes the stage wears an austere black suit and the sort of beard that suggests he's either deeply spiritual or frequently cold. He lifts a pocket watch, not for the time, but for the sway. He begins to speak. Slowly. Gently. Almost too gently. "You are drifting," he says, voice low and syrupy. "Drifting like a paper boat upon a still lake. Your eyelids grow heavier, not from magic, probably, but from the fact that you've walked half the city on 5 imaginary hours of sleep." The Victorians were fascinated by hypnosis. Some believed it was a legitimate medical tool, capable of curing anything from phobias to digestive troubles. Others thought it was dangerous, possibly immoral. A few feared it would let wicked men control the virtuous into late-night scandal and poor wallpaper choices. Historians still argue whether it was ever effective, or simply a very refined placebo, amplified by quiet rooms and soft voices. But many insomniacs reported that even one session left them feeling calmer. Not necessarily asleep, but softer. Less clenched. The hypnotist continues. He describes a staircase made of clouds. A velvet rope. A field of bluebells that sways in time with your breath. The language is floral, a bit absurd, but the rhythm is oddly pleasant. Quirky tidbit. Some Victorian hypnotists believe that a person could be lulled into sleep by staring at a polished doorknob for 12 minutes while listening to the sound of dripping water. Others preferred crystal pendulums. One particularly theatrical performer used a taxidermied raven with mirrored eyes. You sneak a glance around the room. A few heads have tilted forward. One gentleman has gone limp with such dramatic flair you suspect he may be angling for applause. There's something comforting about this collective vulnerability. Everyone here has, at some point, fought the dark with flailing arms and spiraling thoughts. And now they've given up that fight, at least for a while, in favor of letting someone else carry the load. Even if only for 20 minutes and a modest fee. The hypnotist begins his countdown now, that old familiar trick. 10, you are floating. 9, the heaviness is warm. 8, the mind loosens. 7, your thoughts drift. Not away, exactly, but sideways. You remember all the other tricks, the lotions and lace, the diaries and onion sachets, and you realize that hypnosis was never just about controlling the mind. It was about asking the mind to rest. Politely. Repeatedly. Until it eventually gave in. And maybe that's what makes this method so timeless. It doesn't demand sleep. It courts it. 5. You are weightless. 4. The breath slows. 3. Your muscles melt. 2. He pauses. There's a silence you can feel in your ribcage. And 1. You aren't sure how long you sit there afterward, eyes shut, not quite asleep but no longer fully tethered to your thoughts. Time slows. Then bends. Then unravels gently, like a dropped skein of yarn. When you open your eyes, the room is nearly empty. A cup of weak tea waits on a tray. The hypnotist is gone. Just the woman in the paisley shawl remains, smiling faintly. Did it help? She asks. You nod. Not sleep, exactly. But quiet. That's sometimes better, she says. Sleep comes after quiet. Not before. You sip your tea and step out into the sunlight. And as you walk, you notice something new in your limbs. They feel floaty. Not rested, not yet. But light. Like your bones have remembered they don't need to brace so hard against everything. You walk through the now sunny street, a little slower. Letting the day happen around you, without rushing into it. The city has woken. But your mind? It's still lounging in a bluebell field, counting backward. Sleep may not be here yet. But it's close now. The streets shimmer with morning now, cobbles glistening from a light mist that's already retreating into the shaded corners. You've walked through half of London's dreams, or attempts at them, and somewhere between the electric spas, the onion cures, and the embroidered pillows, you've found a kind of rhythm. You step off the path and into a townhouse not unlike others you've visited, but this one feels slower. Sleepier. It welcomes you in without a creak. The carpet muffles your footsteps. The door closes behind you with a sigh. This is the home of someone who's made peace with sleep. Not conquered it, not mastered it, but met it somewhere in the middle. Someone who stopped fighting. Who stopped swallowing chalky tonics and flipping pillows and whispering affirmations into the dark. Someone who, eventually, just learned to wind down like a gaslight. In the sitting room, a kettle steams gently, not whistling, just warming. The wallpaper is faded, in that pleasant way things fade when left alone long enough. A tabby cat dozes on the windowsill, tail twitching once every few seconds like a dream is reminding it who's boss. You climb the stairs, and at the top is a bedroom. Modest. Well kept. A little dusty in the corners. The curtains have been drawn halfway, not enough to block the light, but enough to soften it. There's a bed here, of course. Not the kind that boasts or squeaks or cradles 8 strangers. Just a normal bed, made up with cotton sheets that have been washed more times than anyone can count. It smells faintly of lemon soap and lavender sachets. The nightstand holds no elixirs, no mysterious vials or logbooks. Just a folded handkerchief and a single dog-eared novel, resting face down like it gave up waiting for someone to finish it. You sit on the edge of the bed. This, you realize, is what sleep looked like when it finally arrived. Not as drama. Not as diagnosis. Just as rest. Earned not by effort, but by rhythm. By repetition. By letting the day be what it was and the night unfold as it wished. This room doesn't chase sleep. It invites it. The way a fireplace invites a story. The way a gentle rain invites a nap. You lie back. There's a creak in the floorboards, an old friend by now. A bird chirps once, and then decides it's done for the moment. The world outside moves on, but you don't feel the need to follow. And it's here, as your limbs soften, that you recall everything you've seen. The ghost of camphor. The electric hum. The diary entries, the dream flutes, the footbaths, the midnight charts. The marketing, the messes, the midnight prayers said half asleep and mostly out of habit. Historians still argue whether Victorian insomnia was worse than ours. Whether their world was truly more restless, or just more poetic about it. whether the cluttered remedies were expressions of hope, or just cleverly disguised noise. But lying here now, you think maybe it doesn't matter. Because what you've seen isn't just a history of not sleeping. It's a history of trying. Of people building rituals around rest not because they knew it would come, but because they hoped it would. And sometimes, hope is enough. A teacup. A warm brick at your feet. A friend reading psalms in the next room. You pull the blanket a little higher. And just as your eyes begin to close, not from fatigue, but from softness, you realize that sleep was never just about silence. It was about safety. About creating a world quiet enough, soft enough, kind enough, to let go. And here at last you let go. So now, the city falls behind you. The cobblestones fade, the gaslights dim to memory, and the echoes of footsteps soften into nothing more than imagined sounds behind closed eyelids. The weight of the day, and of this long, winding walk through Victorian shadows and candlelight, begins to lift. Like mist rising from rooftops, it leaves behind only stillness. Your breath deepens, without trying. Your limbs, heavier now, settle into softness, into quiet, into comfort. There are no more odd cures to try tonight. No more remedies to weigh. No charts to keep, no diaries to scribble, no doctors waiting with solemn nods and bitter drafts. Just stillness. And breath. And the gentle hush of a house that has seen it all before and knows how to sleep through anything. Outside, somewhere, a cart rumbles past. But here, in this hush, it's only background, like waves on distant shores or the whisper of wind across a far-off moor. There's nothing left to fix. Nothing left to earn. Only this moment. Only this slow, quiet exhale. This last blink. This last thought. And then... nothing. Good night.